The day began like any other across the galaxy. Trading routes buzzing with life, ships drifting through star systems, and worlds carrying on with their quiet routines. But then a single emergency transmission shattered that calm. It came from a neutral transport vessel near the edge of the frontier. A distress call that barely lasted 10 seconds before cutting out. Within minutes, every major communications channel lit up with one terrifying message. A warlord faction from the outer systems had captured a human transport ship. And not just any transport ship. It carried human children. The shock traveled faster than light. Within hours, the Galactic Council chamber was filled to the brim with alien delegates, their faces pale and rigid, their hands twitching nervously. The massive chamber, usually filled with endless speeches and political games, was silent except for the sharp, clipped voices of the analysts reporting the details. The holographic display at the center of the room showed the grainy recording of the attack. A fleet of warlord raiders had swarmed the small human vessel like a pack of predators, boarded it, and dragged it away into the shadows of unclaimed space. There had been no resistance. No screams. Just silence after the transmission ended. The Speaker of the Council stood frozen at the top platform, his long fingers clutching the edge of the glowing table. He had seen wars, invasions, rebellions, but this was different. This wasn't an ordinary raid. Everyone in the chamber knew it. The delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting between the screen and each other, searching for someone brave, or foolish, enough to speak first. The silence was finally broken by the voice of an elder alien from the Vren Dominion, old enough to remember the last time someone made the same mistake. His voice was thin but sharp. "They captured human children," he said slowly, as if tasting every word. "They just signed their death." The younger delegates frowned, some confused. One whispered, "Why is everyone acting like this? They're just children. This happens all the time in raids." A commander from the core worlds turned to him with cold eyes. "Because they are human children," he said, "and no one touches them and lives." The words echoed through the chamber like a warning bell. Everyone who had lived through the war 30 years earlier knew exactly what he meant. When humans were attacked, they didn't negotiate. They didn't threaten. They erased. On the far side of the galaxy, the warlord fleet celebrated their victory inside their jagged, rust-covered station. To them, it was just another raid. A few easy hostages, and soon they'd demand payment. They had captured diplomats before. Nobles. Soldiers. Even alien leaders. No one had ever dared to touch their base after that. So why would humans be different? Drunken laughter filled the halls as they broadcast their triumph to the black markets. But what they didn't realize was that even the smugglers who received their transmission didn't cheer. They turned their systems off in fear. Because they, too, knew what would follow. Back in the council chamber, reports flooded in. Human communication networks had gone dark. Their colonies had stopped broadcasting regular traffic. Civilian chatter was gone. Military command stations were sealed. At first, some thought it was a sign of panic. But the veterans in the chamber recognized it immediately. It wasn't panic. It was preparation. The same silent pattern had appeared decades ago, before the event the galaxy still whispered about, the Iron Vengeance. An alien general leaned closer to his screen, his skin paling as he whispered, "They've already received the signal." The speaker tried to maintain control, raising his voice above the rising whispers. "We must not escalate this further," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. This was a criminal act by a fringe warlord faction. Humanity will see reason, but he didn't even finish before someone shouted, "Reason? When it comes to their children, there will be no reason." Panic crept into the room like smoke. Some empires began pulling their fleets back from border territories. Others started locking down their planets. They weren't afraid of the warlords. No one feared the warlords. They were afraid of what would come for them next, not because they were guilty, but because humanity's rage never stopped at a single target. It rippled. It crushed anything that stood too close. An emergency hologram appeared above the center of the chamber. It was a recording from a scout satellite near the edge of human space. A fleet was moving. Not merchant ships. Not patrols. Black ships, heavy, silent, massive. Dreadnoughts, carriers, cruisers, all moving in perfect formation. There were no broadcasts, no threats, no speeches, just the unmistakable signal of a Terran war fleet preparing to leave orbit. The image sent chills down every spine in the room. Humanity wasn't discussing this. Humanity was answering. In the warlord stronghold, their leader leaned back in his command chair, grinning at the list of ransom offers they planned to send. He thought this was just business. But several of his lieutenants were beginning to shift uneasily. One of them, an older raider with deep scars across his neck, stared at the dark void outside. "We shouldn't have taken humans," he muttered. "Especially not their young." The others laughed at him, mocking his fear. But he didn't laugh. He had seen human ships once, long ago. He remembered how they arrived, not with warnings, but with silence. And how everything they touched burned to ash. In the council chamber, someone whispered what everyone else was already thinking: it's too late. The galaxy wasn't preparing to stop humanity. It was preparing to stay out of their way. Every race had learned this lesson the hard way. Humanity had 100 ways to fight, but only one way to answer the harm of their young, with total, absolute vengeance. The speaker sank into his chair as the war room lights dimmed. The feed from the Terran fleet flickered once more before cutting to black. No one needed a translation to understand the meaning. They were already moving. And far out in the darkness, past the borders and the trade routes, where no law held power, a single warlord base still laughed. Unaware that death was already on its way in the black reaches of space, far from the order and control of the Galactic Council, the warlord base floated like a rusted predator hiding in the shadows. It was an ugly, jagged structure built from stolen metal and shattered ships, its hull scarred from years of raiding. For most of the galaxy, this place was untouchable. No one bothered to challenge them out here. They were raiders, scavengers, thieves, a plague no one wanted to deal with. And now, they had done something that no one dared to do in centuries. They had taken human children. Inside the station's great hall, the warlord leader lounged on a broken command chair that once belonged to a council cruiser. Around him, raiders and mercenaries roared with laughter as the images of the captured transport ship played over and over again on a cracked holoscreen. It had been too easy. The humans hadn't sent warships with the children. Just a civilian escort, unarmed and slow. They took it in minutes. No losses, no resistance. To the warlords, it was a perfect job. They were already making plans to sell the children to the highest bidder, rivals of humanity, black markets, or perhaps ransom them back to Earth for power and credits. One young raider slammed his cup of burning green liquor against the table. "Do you realize what we have?" he shouted with a grin. "Terran children. Not soldiers, not diplomats, not machines. Their offspring." Laughter shook the walls. Another raider leaned forward, teeth glinting under the flickering lights. "Do you know how much the black networks will pay for them? We're going to be rich, brothers. Rich and untouchable." But not everyone in that hall was laughing. In the corner of the room, an older raider leaned against a steel pillar, his one remaining eye fixed on the hologram. He had survived wars most of them were too young to remember. His name was Vesk. He had seen human fleets once, long ago, when his old crew attacked a Terran outpost. It was supposed to be easy. It wasn't. He still remembered the silence. The human ships didn't send messages. They didn't make demands. They just came. And in one night, his fleet was reduced to scrap. The only reason he lived was because they didn't see him as worth killing. He spat on the ground and growled. "You idiots don't understand what you've done." The loud laughter stopped. Some looked at him with annoyance. Others with confusion. The leader, a broad and scarred alien named Drogar, narrowed his eyes. "Old man," he said with a grin, "save your ghost stories. We're not scared of humans." Vesk pushed off the pillar and walked slowly toward the center of the hall, his boots echoing against the cold metal floor. "You should be," he said simply. "You didn't just take prisoners. You didn't take soldiers they could replace. You took their children. Human children." He pointed toward the screen where the image of the small transport ship lingered. Do you know what happens to anyone who does that? One of the younger raiders rolled his eyes. Yeah, the stories. The Terrans are monsters when you cross them. Blah blah. Vesk slammed his metal hand down on the table, the sound cracking through the air. This isn't a story, he growled. This is death walking toward us right now. You don't understand their kind. They can forgive war. They can forgive trade. But their children? They will burn worlds for that. Drogar laughed loudly, trying to keep control of the room. Let them come. This base is hidden. No one has ever found it. We've survived the Council. We've survived pirate wars. You think some humans scare me? But even as he said the words, something flickered across the control screens above them. The radar operators sitting in the tower exchanged worried glances. Small distortions in the outer system. Faint, almost invisible energy signatures, like distant storms gathering at the edge of their vision. Boss, one of them called out nervously, you might want to see this. Drogar turned, annoyed, and stomped toward the console. What now? Readings on the far perimeter, the operator said. No ID. No transmissions. Just movement. Probably smugglers, someone muttered. But even as they spoke, the readings multiplied. 1 contact. Then 5. Then 12. Then 27. All silent. All closing in. The old Raider Vesk's one eye widened. They are here, he whispered. They don't warn you. They never warn you. Drogar snarled, refusing to show fear. Raise the shields. Deploy the patrol fleets. But the moment he gave the order, the lights on the command board flickered. One by one, the perimeter beacons went dark. Patrol ships that were supposed to respond gave no signal. No distress calls. No gunfire. Just silence. The radar filled with blank spaces where ships should have been. A single cold drop of sweat rolled down the operator's forehead. They are gone, he whispered. The patrol fleet, it's just gone. The old raider's voice broke the stunned quiet. This is what they do, he said bitterly. They strip away your walls without firing a shot. They cut the light. Then they come. In the council chamber, far from the frontier, similar readings reached the delegates. The Black Fleet was moving. Entire sensor grids along the frontier were being blinded. Every empire that had a border near the warlord's territory began withdrawing ships and shutting down routes. No one wanted to be caught in the storm. Delegates shouted, "We have to warn them." But another voice snapped back, "Warn them? They're already dead." Back in the warlord base, Drogar stared at the growing formation on the display. The unknown contacts were too organized. Their formation too perfect. No signals. No noise. Just silent death creeping closer. This can't be real, he muttered. But Vesk's voice was calm, almost cold. You're not fighting raiders. You're not fighting soldiers. You're fighting parents. The room fell silent. Outside, in the endless dark, a shape appeared on the horizon. A single black dreadnought, its hull the color of the void, gliding forward with terrifying grace. No banners. No signals. Just the ship itself, larger than anything the warlords had ever seen. Then another dreadnought appeared behind it. Then another. And another. Within minutes, the stars themselves seemed to vanish behind a wall of Terran steel. Humanity hadn't just found them. Humanity had surrounded them. On the station's lower decks, the children sat huddled in a secured cargo bay, unaware of the storm closing in outside. The warlords thought they had power. They didn't know that every heartbeat in that room was worth more to humanity than 1,000 star systems. And out in the void, humanity was already coming. Not to negotiate. Not to talk. To end this, the council chamber was no longer a place of power. It had become a place of fear. The towering pillars that once echoed with confident speeches now stood over a room full of restless, silent figures. The news had spread to every corner of the galaxy. It wasn't just a raid anymore. It wasn't just an abduction. The warlords had taken human children. And in the hearts of every alien who remembered the past, one truth kept ringing like a siren through their minds. When humans come for their own, no one survives their path. Delegates from every empire filled the massive round chamber, their voices low and tense. Normally, council meetings were full of loud debates and insults thrown like weapons. Today, there were none. Everyone knew the stakes. Holoscreens floated in the center of the room, projecting intelligence reports, system scans, and live feeds from frontier sensors. One by one, those feeds were going dark. Outer detection networks were falling silent without warning. Entire listening posts erased as if swallowed by the night. The council didn't need anyone to explain who was doing it. They knew. Humanity was moving. The speaker stood at the high platform, gripping the railing as if it could keep him steady. His pale skin looked almost gray under the cold lights of the chamber. "We need to understand what is happening," he said, but even his voice lacked strength. "We need." A delegate from the Serek Dominion slammed his hand against the table. "What is there to understand?" he snapped. "They took children. You know what happens next. The humans won't come to talk. They won't come to negotiate. They will come to erase." Murmurs spread through the room. No one could deny it. Everyone in that chamber either lived through the last war involving humans or had been raised on the stories. Stories that were not exaggerated, because everyone who underestimated humanity ended up as ash. One tall delegate with scaled skin stood and pointed at the holographic map showing the Warlord's sector. "That faction has no idea what they've done. They're celebrating now, laughing. They don't know they've already dug their own graves." An admiral from the Vraxis systems leaned forward. "The human fleets have gone dark. No transmissions, no chatter, no movement we can track. This is exactly how it started 30 years ago," he said. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen it firsthand. "They always go silent before they strike. When their children are involved, there's nothing left behind when they're done." The speaker tried to sound reasonable, though his hands trembled. "We must try to mediate. We can open communication channels. If we can convince humanity to. Convince humanity." The words came from an older alien sitting in the corner, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a blade. He had scars running down his throat, the kind only war leaves behind. "No one convinces humanity when it comes to their young. Do you remember the Hellion massacre?" The room fell utterly still. Every delegate knew the story. An alien pirate faction had taken only 5 human children hostage, thinking it would give them leverage. 2 days later, there wasn't a single ship, station, or moon left in their territory. It hadn't been a battle. It had been a message. The old alien leaned forward, his voice lowering to a growl. "This time it's not 5. It's a whole ship of them. Entire families are watching. Entire fleets are moving. You can't talk your way out of this." A nervous whisper spread through the chamber. Some empires were already moving their own fleets away from human borders, trying not to get caught in what everyone knew was coming. One delegate finally said it aloud. "We should evacuate our frontier systems. If humanity goes after the warlords, they might burn everything in between." At that moment, a holo-projection flickered to life. A transmission from a frontier scout ship. The image was shaky, distorted by interference, but it showed something that made the entire room fall silent. A massive black ship, far larger than anything in council fleets, drifting at the edge of the Warlord sector. Its surface was smooth and dark, with faint blue lines glowing like veins under its hull. Around it, dozens of smaller Terran warships moved in eerie silence. There were no communications, no identification signals. They weren't announcing their arrival. They didn't need to. An analyst's voice trembled over the speakers. "Estimated power output of the lead dreadnought exceeds known Council capital-class warships by a factor of 3. Maybe more. It's like they built a warship out of the void itself." A ripple of fear spread through the delegates. One of them stood, shouting, "They found the Warlord's base already." Another leaned forward and whispered, "No, they didn't find it. They were already on their way." The speaker's voice cracked as he tried to maintain order. We We can still negotiate. We can. They don't negotiate over their children, a delegate shouted. They don't negotiate. They destroy. And they all knew it was true. In the entire history of the Galactic Council, humanity was the only species that had never left their young behind. Not once. No treaty, no threat, no fleet had ever stopped them. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't ask for help. They took back what was theirs. New reports flooded in from frontier systems. Civilian transports were rerouting. Trade hubs were closing. Patrol stations were going dark to avoid drawing attention. No one wanted to get in humanity's way. Even the Council military forces had begun quietly pulling back. Nobody said it aloud, but everyone understood. They weren't going to defend the warlords. They were going to let them burn. An alien ambassador with golden eyes leaned toward the speaker. They're going to make an example, he said softly. They'll leave nothing of that faction behind. They'll do it fast, clean, and loud enough that no one will ever try something like this again. The speaker tried to keep his voice from shaking. And what happens if their fury spreads beyond the warlords? What if they don't stop there? The old scarred delegate shook his head slowly. Then none of us can stop them. At that same moment, at the far edge of the galaxy, the first of the human fleets vanished from sensors, slipping into FTL space. They weren't moving like an army. They were moving like a blade aimed at a target. The warlords didn't even know their death was already on its way. The Council could do nothing to stop it. The galaxy could only watch and whisper, because everyone understood this wasn't just another military operation. This was personal. And when humanity made it personal, entire civilizations disappeared like dust in the wind. The warlord base drifted at the edge of a dying star system, surrounded by the cold silence of deep space. Jagged metal towers and rusted gun platforms hung in orbit like broken teeth, their lights flickering with the lazy confidence of raiders who believed no one would dare come for them. Inside, the warlord leader Drogar sat on his throne of scrap metal, smirking as he sipped a thick black drink. His men were loud, drunk, and proud. They thought they had won something great. To them, the captured human children were nothing more than leverage, a prize to be sold or traded. They couldn't hear the storm moving toward them yet. They didn't understand that their celebration wasn't a sign of power. It was the calm before their own destruction. Vesk, the old raider with one eye, paced along the observation deck, staring out into the void. He couldn't relax. The stars beyond the station seemed wrong. Too still. Too quiet. He had seen this before, years ago, when human warships had come for his old crew. They didn't announce their arrival. They didn't scream. They simply appeared, like a nightmare stepping out of the dark. He tightened his jaw as the unease settled heavier in his chest. They are coming, he whispered to himself. Down in the command center, one of the radar operators frowned at his screen. A faint disturbance was spreading along the far perimeter of the system. It wasn't a ship signal. It wasn't a weapon. It was a shadow. Boss, he called, his voice cracking. We've got something. Drogar grunted, annoyed to have his drinking interrupted. It's probably some merchant scum or a ghost signature. Ignore it. But the operator didn't look convinced. No, sir. It's growing. The screen began to light up, one contact, then 2, then 50. The signatures were black, masked, moving with unnatural precision. There were no comm signals, no ship IDs, nothing that could be read. Just dark shapes advancing toward the system in a silent line. The operator's hands began to shake. Boss, I think it's them. Drogar slammed his cup down. Raise the perimeter defenses. I want every cannon powered up and every fighter ready to launch. They can try to scare us, but they won't. He stopped mid-sentence when the lights above him flickered. A low hum filled the station. All across the base, power grids fluctuated as if something was pulling energy away. Then, one by one, the perimeter beacons went dark. Patrol ships vanished from the radar. No explosions. No distress calls. Just nothing. Vesk leaned against the wall, his single eye locked on the growing black wave on the screen. They're not trying to scare you, he said softly. They're already here. The Warlord fighters scrambled from the hangars, their engines roaring into the dark. But as soon as they reached the edge of the station's sensor net, their signals blinked out. Not a sound returned. No gunfire. No screams. Just silence. A younger raider ran up to Drogar, his face pale. Sir, they're not reporting in. Every squadron is just gone. Drogar roared. Keep sending them out. But each wave met the same fate, erased like dust in the wind. In the black void beyond the station, they finally appeared. A wall of Terran warships slid out of the darkness without a single flare of light. Their hulls were made of a matte black alloy that reflected nothing. Massive dreadnoughts and cruisers formed tight formations, their engines silent, their weapons not yet firing. To the warlords, they looked like an endless ocean of darkness swallowing the stars. A young raider whispered, his voice trembling, "They're not ships, they're shadows." The lead Terran dreadnought moved forward. It was bigger than any ship Drogar had ever seen, its edges smooth and sharp, as if carved from a single block of the void. Glowing blue lines pulsed faintly across its surface like veins beneath skin. It emitted no warning, no broadcast, no demand. Just quiet pressure, like the cold weight of a predator's gaze. The entire station seemed to groan under the invisible force pressing down on it. Drogar slammed his fist on the command table. Fire everything. Alarms wailed as the station's weapons came online, massive rail cannons locking onto the human fleet. Dozens of warlord ships opened fire at once, filling the void with burning red projectiles. For a moment, their confidence returned. They screamed war cries as explosions lit up the darkness. But when the smoke cleared, the Terran fleet was untouched. Every shot had been absorbed or deflected by some invisible field that shimmered faintly, like ripples on water. They didn't even fire back. Panic began to spread through the base. "Why aren't they attacking?" a raider shouted. "Why are they just standing there?" No one had an answer. The fleet simply hung there, silent and patient. It was psychological warfare at its finest. Humanity didn't just destroy their enemies. They let them understand the scale of their mistake first. Vesk moved closer to Drogar, his voice low and steady. "This is their way. They want you to feel it. They want you to know exactly what you brought on yourself." On the lower decks, guards paced nervously near the cargo bay where the children were held. Some of them whispered about fleeing. Others tried to convince themselves that the humans wouldn't risk a full assault to save a handful of children. But their words were thin and empty. Everyone had heard the old stories, the way Terran fleets erased anything that stood between them and their own. Suddenly, the station lights went black. Emergency sirens flickered to life as backup power struggled to keep the systems online. Then the doors began to fail. Locks disengaged without anyone touching them. Hallways that had been secure seconds ago were now open. The security feeds glitched and went dark, replaced by one cold image. The hull of the Terran dreadnought, filling the entire view. "They're inside," someone whispered. On the radar, small blips appeared inside the base. Not ships. Dropships. Hundreds of them. They moved with precision, slipping through the warlord defenses like knives through silk. Automated turrets were disabled before they could fire. Gates were opened before alarms could ring. The humans weren't knocking on the door. They were already walking through it. Drogar roared, drawing his plasma blade and shouting at his crew. "We fight. We don't kneel to Terrans." But his words felt hollow even to himself. No matter how loud he screamed, it wouldn't change what everyone already knew. The humans had arrived. And when they came for their children, they didn't come as soldiers. They came as something far worse. Something unstoppable. The warlord base had been proud, loud, and defiant. Now it was surrounded, suffocating in silence. Outside, the black Terran fleet hovered like a shadow over a dying star, patient and cold. Inside, the raiders who once laughed now trembled in the dark. They were starting to understand what every empire before them had learned. You can take anything from humanity, except their children. And for that, the galaxy always pays in blood. The warlord base trembled as if it already knew what was coming. The lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the rusted metal corridors. The raiders who had been celebrating just hours earlier now whispered like frightened animals, their laughter gone. Every step echoed in the silence. The Terran fleet outside didn't move. It just hovered in the dark, a wall of black steel that blocked out the stars. Its silence was more terrifying than a storm of gunfire. It was the silence of a predator that knew its prey couldn't run. Drogar stormed into the command center, his thick boots thudding against the metal floor. His lieutenants stood in a nervous circle around the holographic display. Red warning lights blinked across the system map. Entire defense lines were gone. Patrol fleets had been erased without a sound. Fighter wings had never returned. The enemy didn't leave debris, didn't leave wreckage. They just vanished. How many are still standing? Drogar barked. No one answered. Finally, one officer whispered, "None. It's just us now." His teeth clenched. He slammed his fist into the console so hard it cracked. Then fight. Launch the internal defense drones. Lock every corridor. If they want the children, they'll have to come through us. Vesk, the old raider with the single eye, leaned against the bulkhead, his voice calm but cutting. They already are. Drogar glared at him, ready to lash out, but Vesk pointed at the radar feed. Small, black dots were appearing inside the base itself. Terran drop pods, silent, invisible to standard sensors, were already moving through the corridors. They had bypassed the shields like they weren't even there. The humans were inside, moving like ghosts through the station's veins. The power dimmed again, and a deep, humming vibration filled the air. The raiders looked up as every door lock in the command center turned red. The human boarding teams had seized the internal security systems. One of Drogar's lieutenants shouted in panic, "They're overriding everything. We've lost control of the station." Drogar grabbed him by the collar and snarled, "Then take it back." But even as he yelled, the console in front of them went black, replaced by a single pulsing icon, a Terran symbol, glowing like a quiet heartbeat. Out in the corridors, the first gunfire erupted. Raiders rushed into the hallways, firing blindly into the darkness. Their voices were sharp, desperate, uncoordinated. Then came the sound, a faint, synchronized thud, like boots striking metal in perfect rhythm. They weren't loud. They didn't rush. Terran strike teams moved like a tide, black armored soldiers advancing through smoke and failing lights, every motion clean and precise. They didn't scream war cries. They didn't issue demands. They moved with the cold patience of something that knew it would win. A raider squad crouched behind a barricade, aiming their rifles toward the end of the corridor. One of them whispered, "Where are they?" Then a shadow flickered across the wall. A single Terran figure emerged from the smoke, tall, armored, visor glowing faint blue. The raiders opened fire, filling the hallway with plasma bolts. The Terran soldier moved through it like water, every step calculated, their shield field bending the energy harmlessly aside. Behind them, more Terrans appeared, moving as one. Within seconds, the raiders' barricade was gone. No screams, just silence. Back in the command center, the gunfire grew closer. Drogar's men were falling back, room by room. "They're cutting through us," a lieutenant shouted, panic twisting his voice. Vesk closed his one good eye and exhaled slowly. "This is how it ends," he said softly. Drogar rounded on him, furious. "You coward! We're not done." But even as he roared, the hallway outside shook with a single, heavy impact. The door locks melted like wax. A cold wind rushed in as the steel barrier slid open without a sound. They were there. A squad of Terran soldiers stepped into the command center like shadows come to life. Their black armor absorbed the light, their movements smooth and precise. The lead soldier raised his rifle, not firing, just pointing it. A low, mechanical voice echoed through the room. "Where are they?" Drogar didn't answer. His hand went to the blade on his hip. But he wasn't a fool. He saw it in their posture, in the stillness behind their helmets. These weren't soldiers looking for a fight. They were executioners looking for results. One wrong move, and he'd be erased before taking a breath. One of his men tried to raise a weapon. A single Terran shot cracked through the air. The raider dropped without a sound. The others froze. Where? Ah! They! The voice came again, colder this time. Drogar's heart hammered against his ribs. He had faced council forces, pirate fleets, bounty hunters, but nothing had ever felt like this. This wasn't war. This was judgment. Slowly, he raised a trembling hand and pointed toward the cargo bay. The Terran leader didn't say a word. They turned and disappeared into the corridor with their squad, leaving Drogar and his men frozen in place, the air around them colder than steel. Meanwhile, in the cargo bay deep within the station, a handful of nervous guards stood outside the reinforced doors. Inside, the children sat huddled together, wrapped in thin blankets, their eyes wide and tired. The guards could hear the gunfire getting closer, floor by floor. One of them whispered, "If they break through, we're dead." Another shook his head, "They won't break through. They'll just walk in." Then the lights died completely. The hallway fell into pitch black, and with it came the sound, boots. Not rushed. Not chaotic. Calm. Measured. The guards raised their weapons, fingers trembling. Then, like the darkness itself had come alive, the Terran strike team appeared. Their armor shimmered faintly in the emergency red light. The guards didn't fire. They didn't even breathe. One raised his hands in surrender. Another dropped his weapon entirely. They all knew fighting now was suicide. The Terrans didn't speak to them. They didn't have to. Two of them moved to the door controls, slicing through the locks like paper. The door hissed open, revealing the children inside. A single Terran knelt down, helmet retracting slightly to reveal a human face. The soldier spoke softly, his voice a low promise. "You're safe now." The children didn't scream. They didn't cry. They reached out with small hands, clinging to their rescuers. In that moment, the entire purpose of the Terran fleet was clear. It wasn't about conquest. It wasn't about revenge. It was about bringing their young home. Back in the command center, Drogar and his men heard the quiet hum of Terran engines powering up again. The fleet wasn't attacking the station. They didn't need to. The children were safe. That was all that mattered. Vesk turned to Drogar, his voice low. "This is the part they'll remember." Drogar frowned. "What part?" Vesk met his eyes. "The part where they leave us alive just long enough for the galaxy to hear what happens to those who touch their children." Outside, the Terran dreadnought began to turn, its massive engines igniting with silent fury. The raiders on the station watched in horror as the Terran fleet shifted position around them like a noose tightening. One by one, small explosions lit up the outer platforms, precise and surgical. They didn't destroy everything. They destroyed only what mattered: the fleets, the defenses, the leadership. The rest was left behind as a message. The last thing Drogar saw on his tactical screen was a single phrase transmitted to every channel across the sector. A message simple and cold: "Touch our children, and you end." The warlords who had once laughed now sat in silence, surrounded by wreckage. No trial. No debate. Just a reminder burned into their bones. Humanity had come. Humanity had taken back what was theirs. And in doing so, they had reminded the galaxy why no one touched what belonged to them. The stars outside flickered as the black Terran fleet disappeared into the void, leaving behind nothing but fear. The stars above the warlord system were no longer beautiful. They were drowned out by the cold shadows of Terran warships, hundreds of them hanging in the void like silent blades. No music of engines, no warning sirens, no demands, just their presence alone, suffocating the system like a storm that didn't need thunder to destroy. The warlord base that had once been a fortress now looked small and fragile under the weight of those black ships. The raiders inside had stopped shouting hours ago. Laughter was gone. Confidence was gone. Only the heavy breathing of men who realized their end had already arrived remained. Drogar sat alone in the command chamber, staring at the broken holo table in front of him. The once proud display of their fleet was now just empty red marks scattered like ashes. His ships were gone, his defenses stripped away as if they had never existed. His lieutenants were either dead or locked in rooms too scared to fight. Only the old raider, Vesk, remained near the door, leaning on the wall with that cold, quiet stare. He didn't look surprised. He had warned them. He had seen this before. They don't need to shout, Vesk said softly. They don't need to burn the sky. Just being here is enough. Out in orbit, the Terran dreadnought, the lead ship of the Black Fleet, moved into perfect alignment with the base. Its hull was vast, swallowing light, smooth as if carved from the darkness itself. It had no markings, no name. It didn't need one. Every alien in the galaxy knew what this fleet was. They were the hammer that only fell when humans stopped talking. They were the reminder that humanity didn't fight wars over politics. They fought when someone crossed a line. And the warlords had crossed it in the worst way possible. In the council chamber, light years away, every major empire watched the live broadcast through the intelligence feeds they had hacked into. No one dared to speak. No one dared to interfere. This wasn't a council matter anymore. This was humanity's vengeance, and the entire galaxy knew better than to stand in its way. One delegate whispered, "They're not even hiding it." Another replied, "They don't have to." All eyes were fixed on the warlord system. The galaxy had seen human fleets before, but this was different. This was cold, precise, personal. Inside the base, alarms began to wail weakly as emergency systems tried to stay online. A quiet voice came over the base-wide comms. It wasn't loud. It wasn't shouted. It was a human voice, deep, calm, controlled. To the warlord command, the voice said, "You made a choice. Now live with it." Every raider on the station froze. Even Drogar felt his blood run cold. The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even threatening. It was worse than that. It was certain. Vesk's single eye narrowed. "That's not a warning," he muttered. "That's the last thing they'll hear." Outside, the fleet shifted. A wall of smaller Terran ships moved into formation, their black hulls perfectly aligned. A faint blue light pulsed along their sides, silent communication between machines that didn't need words. Dreadnoughts and cruisers positioned themselves like the pieces of a blade pressing against its victim's throat. The warlord base's shields, already weakened, began to flicker. The Terrans hadn't even fired a shot yet. They were letting the fear do its work first. Drogar slammed his fists into the armrests of his chair. "I won't beg," he growled. But even as he said it, his voice trembled. His hands were shaking. He had built a life on fear, forcing others to kneel. Now he understood what it felt like to be on the other side of it. Vesk didn't answer him. He just stared at the flickering lights outside the observation window. He had survived a Terran encounter once, and that was only because they didn't care enough to finish him. But this was different. This wasn't random. This was a hunt. The voice returned. "The children are safe," it said. "You are not." Every raider who heard those words understood them without needing translation. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. They hadn't just angered humans. They had hurt their children. That wasn't something anyone survived. On the outer decks of the base, some raiders began throwing down their weapons, trying to escape through emergency pods. But as they launched into the black, the pods were caught mid-flight by Terran tractor fields and frozen in space like insects trapped in amber. No one was escaping. Not a single one. Then, for the first time, the Terran fleet moved. But it wasn't the chaotic storm of a normal battle. It was clean, precise, beautiful in its terror. A single dreadnought powered its main cannon, the energy glowing like the heart of a dying star. A narrow beam of blue light carved through one of the warlord defense platforms, splitting it silently in half. No explosion. No mess. Just gone. Another dreadnought followed. Then another. Within minutes, every outer defense was erased with surgical precision. No debris. No survivors. Just quiet. Inside the base, the raiders panicked. They weren't warriors anymore. They were prey. "They're not even fighting us," one of Drogar's men screamed. "They're executing us." Vesk stepped away from the wall and looked at Drogar. "They're not executing us. They're making sure the galaxy remembers this day for 100 years. Back at the council chamber, delegates were whispering nervously. A few even turned off their feeds, too terrified to keep watching. "They're sending a message," one ambassador muttered. Another answered, "Not just to the warlords. To all of us." Back in the warlord base, emergency systems began failing one after another. Power cells burned out. Engines overheated. The life support started to flicker. Drogar's hands clenched tighter around the arms of his chair as his empire crumbled around him. His voice finally broke into a desperate shout. "Why don't they just finish it?" he screamed. Vesk gave a low, humorless laugh. "Because this isn't just about killing you. This is about everyone watching." Then the entire station shook with a soundless impact as the Terran dreadnoughts turned their attention inward. One by one, precision strikes severed every power relay, every command tower, every escape route. The warlord fleet wasn't being destroyed in war. It was being erased. And they all knew it. When the last of the defenses fell, the human voice came over the comms one final time. "You wanted power," it said. "You took from us. Now the galaxy will see what happens when someone touches what's ours." There was no countdown. No mercy. A single blast from the flagship spinal cannon pierced the heart of the warlord base. The structure cracked like glass, glowing blue from the inside before collapsing into itself. Fire erupted into the black void, then disappeared as the vacuum swallowed everything. The station was gone. No survivors. No wreckage worth saving. And then, just as silently as they had arrived, the Terran fleet turned away. No speeches. No victory cry. They didn't need to prove anything to anyone. They came for their children, and they got them back. Everything else was irrelevant. Across the galaxy, the council watched in stunned silence. Messages were sent, orders were whispered, border stations locked down. But everyone already knew, it was too late for warnings. The lesson had been written in fire and shadow. On the edge of the galaxy, in every bar, ship, and world where raiders spoke in the dark, a new phrase began to spread like a curse. "Touch human children, and you disappear." The warlords were gone. The council said nothing. And in the black void, where the stars seemed a little dimmer now, the Terran fleet melted back into the darkness like a predator returning to its den. No one followed. No one ever would. Because the galaxy had been reminded of something ancient and unshakable. Humanity could be negotiated with until you hurt their young. And then there was no negotiation. Only silence. Only shadows. Only judgment.